The 24th of May, the Queen's birthday. If you don't give us a holiday, we'll all run away. Do you remember that ditty from your childhood? It's escaped the latest generations, and it was such fun to have a holiday demand as a small schoolgirl. Well, with or without the poetry, Victoria Day is one of the delicious holidays of the year. Winter and the cold are finally over. The flowers are out along with the wretched dandelions, and you can see the hostas growing by inches overnight. No coats, open doors and windows. Time to walk around the neighborhood just to enjoy seeing everyone out and working on their gardens or washing their cars or playing ball hockey. Barbecues and picnics and hot tubs. Neighbors talking over fences, leaning on their rakes and catching up on all the events of the past months. So many months of the year you just rush from home to shop to home again, or grab the bus and dash through the slush and the cold from home to work. But now, Victoria Day makes it official. The good times, the good weather are here and ours to enjoy. I do like the fact that, unlike so many other countries, we have 4 very different seasons, giving us something to talk about or complain about year-round. But we're now into the best of times in my book. Clearly, Bishop Andrew agrees with me, for in his newsletter he laid out his plans for a May afternoon. I know where my place is and where I will spend the rest of the day. With spade and rake, hoe and shovel, the garden is calling to me. It's time to get my hands dirty in the soil and the earth, to bend toward the ground to pull weed and dead wood, and to relish in the beauty of God's creation. May you find your way to the nearest garden. This is the Victoria Day weekend, traditionally marking the start of gardening, opening the cottage to family and friends, and celebrating with fireworks. As we celebrate this long weekend, the monarchists parade and we enjoy Victorian tea parties, but little is done to celebrate the actual life of Victoria, her influence on the development of Canada as a nation, and her insistence on the role of the First Nations as nations. Normally, this is not a weekend for politicians to get out to berate us or bribe us with our own tax dollars, but this year we can expect those involved in the current provincial election or the federal leadership race to turn up at the barbecues where voters gather to launch into speeches, hand out buttons and lawn signs, and do all they can to get your vote. Canadians for many generations have enjoyed democracy and freedoms only dreamt of by so many other peoples. Freedom of religion, speech, equality of all regardless of race, national origin, color, sexual orientation, age, mental or physical disability, women and men enjoying the same rights, freedom to express your beliefs and opinions, free press, elections, legal protections of the courts, and so much more. We do take these freedoms for granted and expect they will always be ours, with little if no effort on our part. Those living under tyranny have a very different perspective. Fear and self-preservation often force them to hide or abandon their thoughts, their dictates under religious or political jargon. These extremists deny their citizens the right to disagree or to speak openly against them. Debate is denied and orthodoxy is the only option. It is difficult for those living with freedom to understand what it must be like for those who have known nothing except oppression. Victoria Day gives us the opportunity to celebrate so many of the unique features of Canada, particularly our unique monarchical system of government. In 1534, the French discoverer Jacques Cartier claimed his New World discoveries for Francis I, the French monarch, although John Cabot had claimed much of the same lands for Henry VII 37 years earlier. The chieftains of the First Nations played no part in these claimings, undoubtedly unaware of any meaning behind the planting of a flag on their lands. Since that time, there have been 33 sovereigns of Canada. However, today's constitutional monarch is a far cry from the earliest times when kings with absolute power would issue dictums that sent ships sailing to distant lands on perilous journeys to the glory of crown and country, and the acquisition of wealth, resources, lands, and peoples. Following the 7 Years' War between France and Britain, the North American possessions of France were ceded by King Louis XV to King George III and the British Crown in 1763. And since that time, we have only needed to defend our borders once, when invaded by the United States during the War of 1812, when they sought to conquer and annex Canada. Our nation evolved from colony to self-government under the leadership of politicians and the Crown. There was no revolt, there was no war. Meetings were held among local leaders, and then the solutions they recommended were taken across the ocean to Queen Victoria, who recognized not only the union of the 4 initial provinces, but also the legitimacy of the native Canadians' claims to nationhood under the Crown. Respect for others, the protection of freedoms, the equality of peoples are rights we take for granted, rights that are intrinsic to our faith. And it's incumbent upon us to extend them to others, and to share them at home and do our best to encourage them abroad. Such rights and freedoms, as envisaged by Queen Victoria and Sir John A. Macdonald and others, for our nation must be defended and protected. Too often, we take for granted what is rare in this world. The First Nations' understanding of our treaties, as passed down the generations of oral tradition, is that when they were negotiated, were sanctified by the sacred pipe and ceremony. When asked, these same leaders do not see themselves as royal subjects of the monarchy, but rather respect the monarchy for embodying the foundation upon which the nation-to-nation relationship of Canada and First Nations is built. The Crown Indigenous relationship is still held by First Nations leaders as significant, even sacred, and Queen Victoria, Kitchcook Imakswu, the Great Mother, was the original crown with whom the treaty agreements of Western Canada were made. As a nation, we're bound to the promises made by governors before us, and we are responsible to ensure that our nation lives by them. Treaties which date to the beginning of the 18th century are still extant, and today the main guide for relations between the monarchy and Canadian First Nations is King George III's Royal Proclamation of 1763. It's regarded by First Nations as their Magna Carta, or the Indian Bill of Rights, binding on not only the British Crown, but the Canadian one as well. It's part of the Canadian Constitution, reflecting the proclamation setting aside parts of the King's North American realm for colonists and others reserved for the First Nations, thereby affirming native title to their lands. This constitutional and moral basis of nation-to-nation alliance between the parties is personified in the monarch. Thus, the honor of the Crown is at stake in dealings between the First Nations and the Queen. Queen Victoria is not only significant symbolically, but her place in history and her day for commemoration is a reminder for all of us and the Government of Canada that the treaties are living documents. It was promised that these treaties would continue as long as the sun is shining, grass is still growing, and rivers still flow. Too often, we ignore incursions on our rights and those of others because they seem insignificant at the time. Freedom of speech lies at the core of all freedoms, and we must exercise it in our defense of treaties to which we are party, both here and abroad. Our honor and souls require nothing less. So this Victoria Day, as we celebrate a monarch who died 121 years ago, let us celebrate our freedoms, and particularly rejoice in the fact that these freedoms were negotiated and guaranteed without bloodshed as our nation grew into maturity. Canada has become a welcoming home for refugees from the time of the Loyalists fleeing the victors of the Revolutionary War in the USA, to the promised freedom at the end of the Underground Railway, and to those arriving today from Ukraine. It is the Christian thing to do, and one that Victoria would take delight in seeing. Nothing is perfect, us most of all. But until the second coming of Jesus, we are blessed with this land, with the commonwealth to which we belong, and the freedoms and dreams we share, for such blessings for all. This Victoria Day, as we watch the fireworks after the sun sets, let us remember those who gave us all these opportunities: Queen Victoria, the Fathers of Confederation, and the First Nations. Let us commit ourselves to standing up for what is right, standing up against bullies, standing for democracy, standing for the weak and the ill and the hungry and the damaged. Let us stand as true Christians and true believers in freedom, and let us spread the word and have the courage to be true to what we know to be right and just. For God expects nothing less of us. So may it be. Amen. Celebrate our constitutional monarchy, our country, our freedoms with joy and thanksgiving this Victoria Day weekend. Celebrate our monarchy, which gives us a gracious head of state, separate from the petty politics of parties that divide rather than unite, and rejoice in all we have to share.